for this sharing period.
My last time as chair. And Bernard, will you move the slides?
I will.
Good. So, welcome. And we need someone to volunteer for scribing. Stefan has said that he will be insufferably disappointed and then do it if nobody else volunteers. But it would be nice if someone else volunteered for once.
I can start off and see if I need someone else. Will you put me a scribe, Vivian?
Okay. So then that makes us. You all seen the IPR policy, and I noticed that we have new members joining the group all the time. But if you haven't read the IPR policy, I recommend it. And then we say welcome. And as you know, we have issues in media capture that need resolving. Not many this time. And issues in WebRTC PC. We're still hoping to get to the CR stage real soon. But that requires that the spec stop wiggling. That means that we have to get things settled. And when we have bugs raised, we have to either say, here's the change that fixes the bug, or we have to say, this is the bug we want to fix before CR. That might mean we place it in the icebox, or it might be that we close it as no action needed at this time.
GBC isn't working, so unless you can figure out how to get it working, we'll just use my laptop.
Yeah, Taylor, are you commenting?
Oh wait, is my microphone on?
Oh yes. Sorry. So.
This is Adam joining. Sorry for being late.
So, list of discussions items today is purely WebRTC PC. As you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 issues where we have pull requests, where if we can agree that this is the solution to the problem, we can just merge them and say, on tomorrow's meeting and say done. If we don't agree that there's a problem, that this is a solution to the problem, then we have to discuss some more. And we have some issues that don't have pull requests, where we want to chat a little bit about them before deciding whether they need addressing before we go to CR, or whether they don't need addressing at all, or whether there's some third option. So let's start off with the pull requests. Is Jan Ivar here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, talk about the getFlat selectors. At last meeting we said that that sender and receiver make much more sense than track as a selector, and as a result, we're shipping Chrome without a selector at the moment. But if the work group wants something special, please come along.
Yeah, so this is PR 1030, and it pretty much adds, well, it does two things. It adds, as Harald just mentioned, a sender and receiver as valid arguments instead of a media stream track to get stats. Media stream track is still supported for backwards compatibility, where the language is basically that a track means the associated sender or receiver in simple cases. If there's no sender or receiver, or if there's more than one associated, then you get an invalid access error. And that should be sufficient for legacy use. So and the second part that sort of prompted this as well was having a stat selection algorithm. And so with this change in mind, where you start with a sender or receiver, or a track that means a sender or a receiver, then the stat selection algorithm is present in the slide, and it's pretty much, if there's no selector, gather everything. If there is a selector, if the selector is a sender, gather stats for the RTC inbound RTP stream stats objects corresponding to the selector, and then all stats objects that are referenced directly or indirectly by that object. And vice versa for receiver, you get the RTC outbound stream stats. Sorry, so that's
Isn't that reversed?
yeah, I got them reversed in the language there. Sorry, I have to check if that's in the PR as well. But yeah, so obviously, if you provide a receiver, you get the inbound. If you provide a sender, you get the outbound, and you get all stats objects that are referenced directly or indirectly by that object. And corresponds to means the corresponding to a selector means that its SSRC stats attribute matches the SSRC in the selector.
And do they also need to match on transport somehow?
Do they?
I think they're tied to one transport, but I think they're both tied to a transport, but I'm not sure.
Right.
I mean, we can have SSRCs reused between different transports. That's the one that's why I want to be sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess it also, is that referring to SSRC like in the Jessup routing sense, like the SSRC table or something like that?
Good questions. I was just looking for language that would associate I guess in the night case, it's the obvious sender with its stats object.
Right.
So if we have better language there, I'll to include that. And pretty much every stats object reports on a monitored object, which would, in this case, I believe is a one-to-one with the sender and receiver, but if it's not, we should clarify.
No, they're not one-to-one. And let me see, the name of the thing that is one-to-one is actually.
Oh yes, right. So in that case, if you select on a sender, you would get all outbound RTP streams that are associated with that transport. If I'm using the language right, of that sender.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of the thing. And
yeah, there's an array of SSRC IDs there. So yeah, it's the one-to-many.
Yeah, it's the RTP stream corresponds to an encoding.
Right. Okay, so I think we probably need some modifying language there. But any objections otherwise to the concept? I also have a second slide on just detailing what that would include following that algorithm. That's the next slide. And to speak about that, so for the receiver, you get the inbound RTP stream stats, which would include, which has references to associate stats ID for the RTCP stuff. So that dictionary would be included, and also the track ID, codec ID, transport ID. And transport ID in turn would include the RTCP transport ID, selected candidate pair ID, which I believe is only as I understand the stuff, is only the pair that's actively being used. Is that right? And that in turn holds the local and remote candidate ID. So selecting on a receiver would include all those things, but vice versa, selecting on the sender would produce almost the same thing, just switch inbound outbound in that language. Things that are basically unselectable are peer connection stats, which are mostly some data channel properties, and then data channel stats media stream stats, which is just a container for tracks, and also, of course, any unused ice candidate stats. The main value still of a selector is that we've talked to customers who have up to 50. Well, they're doing conferencing with a media server, and they have up to 50 tracks in their peer connection. So being able to select on a track would substantially narrow down the amount of work needed to pull back and the amount of data that has to pull back using the one factor that's the multiplier with the number of tracks, or senders and receivers in just good language. Anyone with thoughts?
This is Adam. Just a question about when we're redoing this API. Has there been any discussion about kind of deprecating this selector thing and going for like get stats on the senders and receivers, and let get stats on the pair connection be the kind of the null selector getting everything? Is that too big of a change?
I think that would be a separate PR, though. We could definitely discuss in addition to our. You mean deprecating the selector entirely?
Yeah, I mean the selector thing was. I think it was. I mean, to begin with, we didn't have an object representing a track being sent, so we kind of tied a pair connection and a track together with the selector API, getting that representation. I mean, and now when we have representations of objects being sent, like senders and receivers, we could just have a get stats call on them. But I don't know if that's too big of a change.
Well, in a way,
Adam, I don't think that's Adam, I don't think that's really that much bigger a change than this one at some level. I mean, it seems like it'd be an easier. I mean, I don't care deeply about this. Either works for me, but it doesn't. It seems like a better API.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's like if we're switching out the selector, it's like we're kind of building on the old hack and kind of deprecating half of it. Kind of.
And another thing that implementation-wise, it's actually easier to add a new API and let people either have or either see that API or not, than it is to add this kind of new function, new selector types. Right. And the fact of selector is that none of the implementations do what we want. So not implementing the selector, not specifying a selector for the pair connections, that would make perfect sense.
Right.
Yes, I think so the main benefit of the PR, I think, is the stat selection algorithm. So I'm definitely open to having different APIs. Note though that Firefox does implement not all the stats, but the most important RTP and outbound stats to the spec already. So but I mean, we could also we could have both. We could certainly look at deprecating one if we think we have a better API. So we're talking about basically sender.getStats, receiver.getStats.
Yeah, that would be pretty much the same as having a sender as a selector.
Is it just the sender and receiver that we're talking about? If it's just the sender and receiver, how would we get like the transport stats or the ICE candidate pair?
Well, you couldn't remove. Well, are we talking about deprecating get stats on pair connection entirely, or just the selector argument?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, get
I think
stats.
You still need. I haven't heard a replacement for get stats without selector.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of getting all the stats for pair connection. That would be pretty natural to have get stats on pair connection. Yeah. But without
I haven't heard anyone arguing for deprecating the no argument get stats on pair connection.
Yeah, that would be kind of the main thing now if we have get stats on other objects as well.
Well, can I suggest one approach is that we commit this PR to get the stat selection algorithm in, and I guess we don't want the sender and receiver selectors. Is that the objection? And we could work on one way to do it would be to commit this PR and then work on the moving get stats or adding get stats to sender and receiver as a separate PR.
It doesn't make that much sense in a way, because if we don't add senders and receivers as selectors, we don't have a wait. Well, wait. If we keep the selection on just on media stream track for backwards compatibility with Firefox, then merging this PR makes sense. We just drop the extra arguments.
Right. Well, if we're confident that we're going to add get stats to sender and receiver, we can also modify this PR to not add the extra arguments to the API. But still include the stat selection algorithm using the media stream tag. That would be a compatible way to get the stats algorithm in, which I'm not hearing any objections to the algorithm. Is that right?
I would not object to that.
Oh, I guess my question is, if we're adding the stats to the objects themselves are we only adding it to the sender and receiver objects, or are we also considering adding, like, can you have stats directly on a transport object or an ICE candidate or an ICE transport?
Speaking with the chair hat, we don't want to add API that people don't have a need for, that nobody's stepping up to say they have a need for. Janiva said that we have a need for selectors because it reduces the amount of work that is needed when you do many tracks.
Right, and the main, JavaScript filtering is so simple in JavaScript anyway. So to have a built-in filtering feature there has to be a performance benefit to it rather than a convenience. Just convenience, I think. So, but I think that this passes that requirement from the uses we've seen.
So if someone wants some more, we should add that as a separate request and a separate bug and have a discussion about that.
Yeah, because if we didn't have a transport selector earlier, that would be a new feature. I guess with this get stats on new objects, kind of, it's just another way of doing what we had earlier.
Well,
so I agree that adding more get stats is to new objects. That's a separate issue, perhaps.
Well, it doesn't sound, I could be wrong, but it doesn't sound to me like the number of transports in the connection will ever explode in a large number, the way tracks do. So I'm not sure selecting on transport is necessary from a performance aspect. That said, though, are you talking about selecting, basically getting only transport information from like 50 tracks? I mean, I guess I could see some benefit. Although, is anyone opposed to? Right.
Who are you asking now, Janiva? Are you asking me? Adam?
Well, I was just, in order to move forward, if we modified this PR to take away the sender and receiver arguments to the get-stats method, could we then merge the stats algorithm? That's a way forward, and then open new issues for and find drivers for the stats changes, API changes for the sender and receiver that were mentioned.
That sounds good to me.
Great.
Okay.
So do we have clear conclusions to this, I think?
So the conclusion seems to be Jan Ivar's proposal, and keep the track as selector, and merge the algorithm for selecting staff subjects, and then we'll treat requests for get stats on other objects as new feature requests, and we're pretty sure we'll get them on senders and receivers.
Sounds good. I guess we're not discussing deprecating track until we have other.
So I just with that though, we need to not lose the one point that the selection algorithm we're talking about merging here is actually wrong with respect to SSRC. So that needs to be fixed as well first, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm happy to take language that would improve that.
I feel like this whole thing is really. I mean, I totally agree in principle where it's going, but it seems like the text for the PR still needs to be written before we know whether it works or not before we decide to merge it. So I think we're a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I don't care. I'm happy to do it whatever we want.
I've added a comment to the PR.
Okay.
Thank you.
I hope Kellen can add some more words too. Okay, next slide.
Thank you, guys. I'm actually going to have to drop unless there are other questions for me.
Okay, see you later.
All right, thank you. Bye.
So, Taylor.
Yes, so this PR is the so-called hybrid OAuth solution that we agreed to, I believe, the last virtual interim, where if you're using normal username password authentication, then username is a username and credential is a password. And if you're using OAuth, then username is the key ID and credential is this OAuth credential dictionary, which has the MAC key and access token. So does that sound right so far? All right, next slide. So I guess while I was writing this PR, a couple issues came up. I just wanted to make sure the working group understands them, and there are no outstanding issues with this approach. So I believe at a previous virtual interim, we decided that rather than the OAuth client querying the ICE agent for its hash capabilities, it would just always request a 256-bit key from the OAuth server and use that to generate both the message integrity and the message integrity SHA-256 attributes. And I believe, again, the decision was when a 160-bit key is needed, the 256-bit key is just truncated. But RFC 7635 says that in Appendix B, the 160-bit key is computed by taking the SHA-1 of the 256-bit key. So it seems like there's both a conflict between RFC 7635 and this working group's decision, and also it seems like a problem that this is only mentioned in Appendix B and not defined normatively, since StunBiz says that other credential mechanisms, which OAuth would be another credential mechanism, must define the key that's used for the HMAC. So, am I missing something, or are these issues that we need to resolve?
Seems like an issue.
Yeah, it seems like an issue.
7635, yeah.
Taylor, I'm going with this is not 100% clear to you how to implement, then it's an issue. So,
yeah.
But this sounds like basically a bug in 7635, or lack of clarity.
Yeah, I interpreted it.
Yeah. Does Justin say what we're supposed to do on this?
I'm looking. Why don't we move on, and I'll see what I can come up with a plan for what we should do here.
Okay. I guess next slide then. So another consequence of deciding to always use a 256-bit key is that essentially WebRTC wouldn't support hash agility then if the client would want to transition to a new algorithm that needs something more than a 256-bit key. So is that a problem, or is that, I mean, does the working group understand that consequence and accept it?
I think the thing was
if you ever want to use stop 512, you have a problem.
Sorry, Bernard, go ahead.
Well, I just said it could be a problem if you're going to use stop 512 or something.
I mean, I think that we should just take as a general principle that we, any algorithm or anything standard we design has to have crypto agility at this point in time, right? I mean.
Right, but I think the intent here was that the server could return an arbitrary length key, and that could be truncated to whatever the client actually supports. And
right.
so
Okay.
at the time we were really considering like the examples being SHA-1 or SHA-256, but there's no need for that to be restrictive of like only those we supported. Now I need to figure out like this thing that the earlier topic about like, do we use SHA-256 as a digest always to produce the key? If that's the case, then we are kind of baking in SHA-256. So that needs to get resolved. But I think as far as like what, the server can return an arbitrary length key, and as long as like, it's longer than whatever the client decides to use, we're fine.
As long as there's a standardized way of truncating the keys so that they both calculate the HMAC the same way.
Right. Which, my expectation was it would just like take a substring of the key.
Wouldn't that need to be specified on the IETF side though?
I do think that given the confusion that's existed, that probably needs to be specified. I mean, I thought it was trivial, but like, let me try to solve the earlier question, and then that might give us, an answer to the second question.
So I mean, I think we should somewhere on the IETF side clearly specify that you truncate and whether you truncate left or right, because that's been, I mean, we messed that up in SRTP. And,
okay.
And then your whole theory for how we have crypto agility is good, right?
Well, I do not want to be in 3 years having to remember like the minutes from this meeting to try to figure out like, what we decided. So I'm happy to write it down somewhere.
Well, right, no, I mean, I think it has to be written down, but yeah.
Okay.
So is there a target that we can punt this to on the IETF side? It sounds like an IETF type problem. It's not an API problem.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, it sounds. If it weren't for the fact that 76035 has already been stamped out as an RFC, I would have just said that this should be spec'd there. I guess possibly we can do this as an errata to 7635.
Obsolete.
All right, well, it sounds like we have an action on there and we can move on.
So who takes the action?
I think Taylor and I will come up with a proposal.
Is there a decision on the disposition of the PR?
Leave open.
Still open. Okay.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, it seems like stuff we can move forward with.
Yeah, I can move the stuff.
If you can modify the PR to have a to work, no matter what the solution is, that's fine. And we can merge it.
I think it would at least be good to put that part to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Taylor, do you think it's possible to do that with the current spec with the current?
Well, right now, PR refers to the 256-bit key and how it's truncated, so I can just remove that from the PR and leave it as an issue.
Yeah, so if you add a sentence saying that that truncate that the key truncation is specified in TBD,
Right.
and then file an issue on that. Then we can close this issue and go on.
Sounds good.
Okay, you'll modify PR too.
All right, so this issue isn't that complicated. When you first create a data channel and you don't pass in an ID explicitly, then the ID needs to be assigned based on the negotiated DTLS role. But if you've done this before in offer answer, then you don't have a DTLS role yet. So currently Chrome and Firefox just return 65535 as the ID in this state. And I'm proposing that to return null instead. And then once the DTLS role is negotiated by an answer, the IDs for any data channels with unassigned IDs are assigned. And then in the rare case that when this happens, all even or odd IDs, corresponding to the selected DTLS role are taken, then resource and use exception would be thrown. Or, okay, not thrown from remote description, but fighting the data channel error event.
This seems a fairly reasonable way. I mean, we've basically been acting as a thin shim on top of the ATF data channel stuff, which uses that ID as the unassigned ID. But there's certainly no reason that in the JavaScript layer we have to retain that. I don't think. The only question would be if anyone actually cares about that right now. Probably not.
All right, so
it seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, me too.
Plus one.
Okay, it's ready to merge. So we'll merge it tomorrow, unless we find more editorial bugs. Sounds good. Fluffy, allow unverified media.
Just a quick question before we move on. Taylor, do we need anything added to JSIP with respect to that? If so, can you open a bug?
I don't think JSIP needs anything because this doesn't affect STP.
Oh yeah, okay. Right. Okay, next one. Okay, so this unverified media. This happens in the case where you connect to a system, and it can happen in multiple different scenarios. In sort of weird cases, most applications don't have to deal with this, but some do. And the classic case is sort of gatewaying to SIP with you've called 1-800-GO-FedEx or some other IVR, which plays useful prompts like press 1 for this and press 2 for that as part of the ringback tone. And you need to hear that before they actually answer and connect. And this is all done to scam billing, but whatever. It does happen, and you have to deal with it. So we've had this as one of our requirements from the very beginning. It goes back to this 74, 78. And the proposal here is that the default option with these types of stuff that arrives before you have the signaling that tells you the fingerprint of the DTLS connection, so you know you're connected to the right person. So you're receiving media that is valid media in some sense, and that somebody sent it. You just don't know who sent it until you get the fingerprint to confirm that. And so the proposal is add a flag that by default, this early media would not be passed to the application. Maybe it would be buffered so you didn't lose iframes or something like that, but that's all optional and up to the implementation. Maybe it would be just discarded. But if this flag's set, it allows this data to actually flow while you're waiting for the fingerprint to arrive in the STP. So it'd only be used by applications that actually wanted this. So I think that's the first thing to understand from a security analysis point of view, is that the application has to deliberately say, I want this behavior and I know what I'm doing. Now, it still needs to have the ICE fingerprints to connect up, right? So it's not like any random attacker on the internet that cannot see the signaling can spoof this media and cause you to receive it. And it's also, the application knows this media is different and will probably handle it differently. It would certainly not display that you were connected to Bob when it didn't know you were connected to Bob yet. It would wait and it would say, this is unknown media, but I'm playing it anyway. And then when it actually knew it was Bob, it would display it as connected to Bob. So I think that when you think about this, it means that an attacker has to be able to get at and read the signaling to be able to spoof this media in the first place. And if they can do that, most scenarios where they can do that, they can also probably just, install JavaScript that directly plays whatever they want on your speaker or directly connects to the attacker or does any other number of zillion things. So I find that the security, this introduces a security argument, super weak on this one. I don't really think it does. That said, the other thing that was done sort of to mitigate that security thing is some people suggested, well, let's only allow this to happen for 5 seconds. And 5 seconds sort of arbitrarily picked. That's long enough for the signaling. It's very, it seems like in most systems, the signaling shouldn't be more than 5 seconds behind the media and getting that message across. And of course, people can come up with scenarios where it is. We could argue about whether this should be 25 seconds or 1 second, but it's, it's in that order of magnitude. Other people have sort of pointed out, well, why bother with the timer at all? It actually really doesn't improve the security situation much at all. I'm sort of in that camp, but I'm perfectly happy to have a 5-second timer too. I think for the actual use case that's driving this, you need enough time that you can reasonably get the signaling. So that's roughly what the PR says. We've talked about this before. At the previous meeting, we sort of agreed that I would, write up a PR and look at what this looks like. And so that's where we are. So with that, let me open it up to comments on it.
This is Randall. It seems reasonable. Certainly there's a use case around this. I don't remember how far back it goes, but Colin says back to the beginning, so that's fine. The 5 seconds thing, yeah, I don't think 5 seconds versus longer or or whatever adds much security level here. You're either doing it or you're not. I'd be fine with no limit, or I'd be fine with, the application says I want n seconds, or I'd be fine with 5 seconds. I don't really care much. I'm tempted to say it's simpler not to have to worry about timers.
That makes sense.
So, So one thing that I think is worth pointing out here is that this is a bit of a corner case in that it doesn't work most of the time due to a NAT pinhole not existing.
Right.
So it's unclear whether you can really build an application that would depend on this feature, because most of the time you're not going to be able to actually receive that media until you get the answer with the actual ICE candidates.
It certainly would work in corporate lands and so on.
Yeah, I think in those environments, it works where you're connected with WebRTC to an SBC that you're connected to quickly that's then gatewaying on, but trying to pass the DTLS connection on to the SIP gateway. Look, I'm never arguing this isn't basically a corner case, but it's unfortunately being able to have GoFedEx work is an important corner case.
But I don't think the GoFedEx case would actually really work well, though, because somebody is trying to reach some call center or whatever like that, for GoFedEx, they're not going to receive that incoming media because they're not going to punch those NAT pinholes. And I think the fundamental question we should be considering is sure, we could add this flag, but all this stuff adds complexity, and we should sort of have this reasoned decision of we're going to take this complexity because we think that the upside justifies.
Well, the SBC, no, the pinholes are going to all punch because they're going to be punched to the SBC, not to the end gateway, which is cloud. It's going to be a public IP address, and that's why the ICE stuff is going to even come up before this, right? So I agree the scenario is complicated, but that's the only way to make it work.
But I still don't see how, with a web browser at home behind like a port symmetric NAT or port restrictive NAT, even calling a public gateway, it's not going to allow inbound media, right, until it gets the ice candidates from the other side.
But there's also the case where you get the answers, but you haven't yet done the DTLS handshake.
Well, that's not what this is talking about.
Isn't this, though?
No.
Yeah, I mean, this is a thing. You'll ICE to the SBC, but then you're trying to DTLS to the gateway.
Well, you can't receive media then.
Well,
But you can't send your stun checks as the browser because you don't have the remote UFrag yet. And
no, you have the remote. You have all the ICE information. You have that. Right?
So where do you get that from?
You don't have the answer.
From a provisional answer.
Okay, so you're saying provisional answers will contain ICE information, but will not contain a fingerprint?
yeah, I'm confused.
Will not
about
contain
that.
the correct fingerprint of the thing you're connecting to anyway, yes. Because you're trying to get the DTLS connection to go to the end gateway.
Okay, so you will have a wrong fingerprint. So it's not only that you have to live with it's not only that you have to allow unverified media, you have to allow media that doesn't verify to the fingerprint you have. Is that correct?
No, you won't have a fingerprint in the provisional answer.
But that's not acceptable. You can't have an answer without a fingerprint. We're going to eat that.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have a data channel there, I think, or some sort of fake channel to basically set up something that wasn't the audio video that you set up on a different transport.
So a fingerprint.
You have a fingerprint of something, but not of, you're not going to have a fingerprint for the audio or video because there won't be any audio or video inlines accepted.
Oh, so this wouldn't be bundled.
So this sort of feels like, you have a fingerprint now, but the fingerprint won't match DTLS, which is automatically going to be exploded.
Okay. Also, I think Justin's point is still valid that if this is a DTLS connection to the remote endpoint and not to a gateway, then that can all needs to be making.
Right. And so it seems like if you get a PR answer, you can figure out a way to make the right fingerprint work. I mean, this is an interesting case, but I think we need to see like the actual case in which this occurs spelled out more clearly, because I think we've now ascertained that the Go FedEx case in general would not be prohibited by this because they could just send a pure answer with the right DTLS fingerprint.
Mm.
Somebody show me a gateway that does that, and we can work through it. I mean,
Well, I think it's hard to have a discussion on this without having a very clear example of what it is exactly we're trying to do. So, Colin, I would like you to sort of see if you can write down something.
I just feel like this is bringing me a rock. I mean, I've presented this countless times to the working group, and I agree. Maybe it's not a clear example or whatever, but I don't know what would be clear. I cannot provide a full architecture of like how the whole thing, like if I provide an example that works, all people are going to say was, well, there'd be other ways to build that architecture. And I just I have a limited amount of time to put into this one, so I'm not quite sure what I should go do.
Well, I think the key point is an example here that would, basically the property here would actually do what it says it's going to do. Because I think the key thing is that if you send back a PR answer with the wrong DTLS fingerprint, that's not going to even validate, and the peer connection is going to be killed. So we need something where the peer connection isn't killed, but yet media somehow is arriving, and we need to be able to sort of still play that out, even though the right fingerprint hasn't yet arrived. the case I thought we were talking about is a case where no answer has yet been received, and there is no signaling fingerprint at all yet, and yet we need to know what to do with media. But as we discussed, like, I don't think that works for browsers because of NATs and whatnot. So, like, I still think that there is, like, you know, the actual example here needs to be more clearly defined.
Okay, so that's exactly let's walk through it really closely right now. The ICE happens to a gateway, and you get what you need from the gateway to set up connections. Some connections, not all connections, as soon as you connect to the gateway. As soon as you connect to the SBC, right? So, or some, just consider it a cloud device that's doing NAT traversal for you, right? So that's how you got the ICE passwords of whatever you're going to talk to, and you can start bringing up the transport connections.
So just be real specific on that. You got all that information through a provisional answer.
Right.
Okay. So we have a fingerprint, we have ICE, we've established ICE.
We've established ICE.
So is gateway the terminating DTLS endpoint?
So right now we're terminating on our ICE on the first endpoint, okay? And then the DTLS is going to be relayed endpoints from the first cloud device, right? The SBC here. Then we're going to be relayed through that to get to the actual gateway, which will do the DTLS will be from the relayed connection through that.
Okay, that makes sense to me now.
Yeah, and so that's why we end up with getting the DTLS connections information, later. And you can try and avoid all of this by decrypting all of them, not having end-to-end media, secure end-to-end media. I can try and draw out something more crisp than that, but.
Yeah, so the scenario you want is one where you get a PR answer with ICE information and a fingerprint that does not apply to media, and then you get the answer that has a new fingerprint that applies to media.
Right.
Is that right?
Just that you don't need the PR answer, because ICE can complete with pure reflexive candidates.
But you can't send an ICE check.
We're only talking about receiving media.
But you can't do how can you do DTLS fingerprint before you send an ICE check and get it?
Okay.
Oh,
because
I should presume right.
But, well, if the remote endpoint is the controlling ICE agent, then it has selected candidate.
You have to receive an
unauthenticated binding response.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which means,
well, I guess allow unverified media would also have to say you don't have to verify the binding response either.
Now we're taking out a pretty big chunk here.
That's a pretty big chunk. I wasn't going that far.
Okay.
I mean, so eventually, of course, I think ICE is totally broken with regards to this, and we should replace it. And I'd like this design to work once we replace ICE with something that isn't as broken as ICE is. But I'm not trying to change ICE right now.
But I don't think that this works with ICE. So this would only work in a world without ICE.
So it's 852. So I think we sort of take this as, just call and try to jot down an email, how you sort of see this working, and, then we can try to analyze that. I think just given that our mission here is to close out 1.0, we really need to be sensitive about, not expanding the scope of work we're trying to do here. And so if we could do something through, a single one method prob and configuration, great, but it's not clear that would actually work.
Okay, well, I think this is something, though, that what happens is every time we have scheduled face-to-face meeting time to discuss it, we punt the issue. And, it's been something we've wanted to solve in 1.0 from very much in the beginning.
I think that's fine, but I think the problem is not sufficiently well defined.
I think we need an example of here are the offers and answers that we expect and what the flag would do with those offers and answers. Because it's not clear.
Yeah.
We need a more specific example to say this is when it would do this.
Okay.
Spear, you want to work with Colin to try to sort this out?
Sure.
All right. Can we continue?
This is the other one that we discuss at every single meeting. So hopefully we can close this one. This was the question about how video is handled. Roughly it says, I think what we agreed at the last one, which is, it says it in more specific details than the PR, but roughly, when you have video and a video input that's a different size than the video you're trying to send, how you deal with the scaling and cropping of that such that we don't get all of these black bars on the tops of bottoms or letterboxing or whatever. And so basically we center the video, we scale it so that it fully covers, so there's no, it's now larger than what you need, so that you scale it so on whichever dimension is the smallest, it's the same. And then you crop whatever is extended over the edge, the size you want. This is a pretty small PR too, so that is basically that one. And Harold, I think I got your editorial comments into it, so thank you.
I haven't been following one. Is this just saying that, media string tracks can't change size, or this is that, if we don't want them to change size, this is how we make sure they don't?
This says when you do need to scale the video somehow, but let's say that the SDP is constrained it to 640 by 480, and your input source suddenly changed resolution. Or even on the initial import source. The name of the original bug is somewhat misleading from what the actual thing is being covered, which is, this was really, Martin raised the issue of, it's not really clear how we take 720p video and put it into 640 by 480.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, and it certainly isn't saying you can't change, if there was no SDP constraint that you can't change within that or whatever. Yeah, it's not, it doesn't change any of that type of thing.
And so this is basically saying we want to always, we never want a black bar. We always want to scale up to fill the stream.
Right. Basically, we choose to lose video. We choose to, crop off some of the top or bottom versus have black. We choose to crop off video versus have black bars is the gist of this one.
Okay. Mm-hmm. There's a part of me that always wants to give questions like this to the application, but I don't care that much. Only a part of me.
Right. I do think that we discussed this quite a bit in Lisbon and came to this conclusion.
And I'm fine with that.
So do we have consensus to merge the PR?
Any objections?
So then let's say we can merge this one.
Okay, I think that takes us back to Taylor with one of our other favorite topics.
Actually, I don't think this one is too controversial. So we've decided in the past that set parameters is allowed to reorder or remove codecs, but not modify them or add them. And so this PR is just specifying that, as you can see by the text there. So none of the members of the dictionary can be modified. Pretty straightforward. And you can't remove a codec and then add it back later. And next slide is also updating set codec preferences, because it made sense to combine the two, and I didn't see anything currently that specifies what codecs are allowed in set codec preferences. So now it says that it can only contain codecs that are returned by the sender.get capabilities with the kind of the, or receiver.get capabilities with the kind of the relevant transceiver. Any objections to this so far, or does this match what we decided already?
Looks fine to me.
I'm not sure if there's anything else. Next slide. I guess that was it. Now, one issue we'll probably get to later is that the codec capabilities dictionary only has a MIME type, which means that in set codec preferences, you wouldn't be able to, oh, this is exactly what Bernard was about to talk about, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
so in the process of talking about this one, we found some other issues. So I opened a new issue on this. So there are examples where we have codecs with multiple clock rates. Like, for example, comprint noise could be like at 8,000 or 16,000, or the SOAP codec can operate at those different clock rates. Or we have H.264 AVC implementations that support packetization modes of 0, 1. That's the case with Firefox. And so there are some methods.
On top of that, you also have the profile could be different too.
Yeah, I think that one is not quite as bad though, because it represents kind of the maximum receiver capability. But in particular, we have get capabilities and then set codec preferences. And when you call get capabilities, the question is, what do you get if you have an implementation that supports these things? Do you get, like, for example, like in the SDP, I believe it's true for Firefox, you'll see the H.264 AVC codec with packetization mode 0, and there's another entry for packetization mode 1. CN, I think you would see an 8,000 clock rate and also a 16,000. So the question is whether you're going to get multiple codecs or one, and because we only have the MIME type so far, you know, if you had multiple, you wouldn't be able to differentiate them. You wouldn't know which was which. And then similarly for set codec preferences, like if you wanted to reorder the H.264 stuff to say I want to prefer packetization mode 1 or something, how would you do that if you only had the MIME type?
Yeah, this is a real problem.
Yeah, I think it is a real problem. So kind of the minimum to fix this particular problem would be to add the clock rate and the SDP FMTP line parameters to the codec capability. I think just those two would solve at least what I just described. And then the question is, as Taylor mentioned, at least so far, you can't, set codec preferences doesn't allow you to modify any of the parameters because it was just a MIME type, so what was the point? But if you add attributes, you know, can you set any of them? Probably it doesn't make any sense to set the clock rate, right, because it's kind of determined from the capability. But here's another weird example. Say you had an application that only required Opus Mono. Could you modify the SDP FMTP line thing to set stereo to 0, for example? Or do we just say, no, you can't modify any of the parameters in set codec preferences? So I guess two questions. One, do we add the attributes? And the second question is, can you modify?
So my question is, could we do the following? Could we say that we don't allow modifying them and we just have a separate codec capability for each version of a codec, like different clock rates for CN and different packetization for H.264. And then we also just have
that's why. Sorry. Point of order. Have we concluded on issue 1024?
Oh, okay.
Because Bernard, you're talking about issue 1040, which is the next slide.
Right. So I guess,
yeah,
the question was, do we accept Taylor's PR 1025?
Yes. And what I heard earlier was that this PR is reasonable, and we should merge.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, then we can go to the next issue, which is how much do we expand the codec codec stuff.
All right. So, Peter, I think your point is right that if we added clock rate and number of channels to codec capability, then you would get multiple dictionaries in Git capabilities, and then you could reorder them. But for the parameters, you wouldn't get a codec for every combination of variable parameters. Like you wouldn't get a stereo equals, an opus with stereo equals 1, an SDP FMTP line, and one with stereo equals 0.
Why not?
Because then you would have, if the codec has 10 different parameters, then for each of them 10 values is supported, then you kind of have a combinatorial explosion.
But is that a realistic thing that's going to happen?
Yes. The H.264 profile level, that by itself is letting all your dynamic payload types.
Well, except this is capabilities, not parameters, so they don't have payload types, but it still would be, it could be a very lot of dictionaries. I think it'd be.
Is that good enough for 1.0?
Well, at least today, I'm only seeing, in the implementations I've seen, right, I think the issue is when do you get a different codec line? And I think that's true only for, at least so far, for clock rate and this packetization mode thing. Maybe I'm wrong. But
profile.
if you support stereo, you just have one line with stereo equal 1. You don't have another one, for stereo 0.
Mm-hmm.
Profile is a real pain because there are compatible but different profiles just to add to the fun.
Well, so we can separate two things. One is there is a way that the browser can tell the application, here's what I'm capable of, and you can select between these. And then there's also the application can jam in extra codec-specific parameters that aren't inside of codec capabilities necessarily.
Right, but that's like set parameters, right, rather than this. All we're talking about here is just two specific methods, I think, which is get capabilities and set codec preferences. And we're just talking about adding to the capability dictionary.
So I guess the fundamental question is how much flexibility do we want to offer in 1.0 as far as specifying all this stuff?
I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think that set codec preferences is actually usable currently with just the MIME type.
Yeah, because of the packetization thing and also I guess the clock rate, though I care less about that. And I think there's definitely a hole there right now.
Let me just punt up a level here for a second. Maybe it is useful with just the MIME type. The packetization, whether it's mode 0 or 1, is still going to be negotiated with the offer answer by the browser. Does the application really want to control that?
And
it seems,
Cullen's point is a good one. The only case where the packetization mode would matter for set codec preferences would be if the application wanted to just fiddle with the preference of 0 versus 1 in the negotiation. Otherwise, I assume that basically, we would, from the implementation at the browser side of things, we would just simply consider all the 264s to be a group and move them together and keep the ordering of 0 versus 1 that the browser has.
That makes sense, but
I doubt the application would care that much about fiddling with the ordering of 0 versus 1. I can't think of any reasonable uses of that.
So the one use I have for the packetization mode is if some application wants to remove packetization mode.
Right.
That's the only reason why it would want to look at the packetization mode at all.
So you have to think about why would it want to remove that as an option. Typically that's because it's talking to some piece of legacy equipment that only supports one of them, in which case normal negotiation would solve that.
right?
No. The only case it would make sense would be where it's talking to someone who supports both, but for some weird reason,
Right.
possibly because it's a gateway, it only wants the packetization mode 0.
It can still FTP munge and do that.
Yeah.
Well, no, you can't because, right? We're just going to go right from create local to set local. So how would you remove, for example, an offer of packetization mode 0?
You remove it before you send it to the other side.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, to do that, but I thought the point of preferences was so you don't have to do that.
But fair enough. That is a good. I mean, I sort of cringe to suggest FTP munging as a solution. I was just sort of pointing out that there was a crappy workaround for people who did want to do this.
Right, and I'm still struggling to think of a case, a real world case where someone really would care about that.
Well, say the application prefers stereo audio over mono. You know, how does it express that?
Yeah, but that's
That's
the second question though, which is whether you can modify the STP FMTP line thing.
I mean, on the stereo mono thing, I always assumed that the browser would do the right thing based on whether the track you were passing into it was stereo or mono. But
super received media.
Received, yeah. And the stereo mono thing seems like a problem worth solving.
Oh, but
that
can
might
we
be
just
done in a
focus
way
on
independent of the codec.
Can we focus on the first question? Do we need additional attributes or not?
Well, I think it makes sense to have additional attributes. The question is whether we care about the combinatorial explosion. It seems like if we didn't have H.264, then combinatorial explosion wouldn't matter. But H.264 apparently has a combinatorial explosion.
Well, no, it's just
capability has an FMTP line, which is what would be put in the offer by default, which is or just the maximum supported capabilities. Then won't that give the application all the information it needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this, Taylor, that the only thing that it's only the stuff that makes you have separate STP lines. And how did you put it? I think if it changes the encoding, right, is the only time you would have that combinatorial explosion. But anyway, I've only seen a codec with a maximum of 2 lines so far. So that, I mean, it's theoretical, but I don't think it actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
But just H.264 packetization mode 0 and 1 and baseline, main, and high, give you 6 different potential H.264.
No, but I guess my point is that packetization mode is different than
it's
profile
different.
level. The packetization mode, you have 2 different payload types offered, and
right.
with the profile level, you win.
No,
Yeah, that's the
profile
differentiator is whether you actually offer different payload types.
Yeah, because you might say I can decode baseline but not high and main. And so, you might say I want a payload type 101, which is baseline, but not 102 and 103, which are main and high.
Well, wouldn't you just have a different profile level in the answer than was in the offer?
Yeah, that's
That's
what I
not how
thought.
264 works.
Or what was that?
That's not how 264 works. You have to.
Oh, is the profile level one of the things that identifies maybe those are the 2.
Yeah. It's a combination of profile level, packetization mode, and though we don't care about it, the interleave thing for streaming media that's relevant for real time.
And don't forget the level asymmetry allowed flag.
Well, but that one is there's just one line, right? It's either allowed or not allowed.
No, I mean, if level asymmetry allowed is set, then you can reply with a different
Yeah, but
different profile.
that's negotiated within the same within the same
within the
payload
same
value.
line, yeah.
Yeah.
So can someone make it clear to me how bad the combination is for H.264? Because someone said you'd have over 100, and someone else said you'd have 6.
Well, I've only seen, in existing implementations, I've only seen 2 lines.
We're talking about if you take the things that identify the codec that need different payload types,
So
then it's only 6 or whatever. But if you take every possible combination of attributes, which I thought was what you were suggesting, then it would be much more.
yeah, the I mean, I can see in terms of real world situations, you know, typically I would expect to see 2 or maybe 4, perhaps 6. You don't necessarily implementation doesn't necessarily have to offer all the combinations, but if it wants to support the different profile levels, it will have to support some version of each of those. And so you're talking on the order of single digits generally.
So why don't we just say that the browser chooses what combinations it wants to enumerate in the codec capabilities, and then the application gets to pick from those?
Well, that's what I think we actually do in practice.
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't we just do that for clock rate and stereo and packetization?
Well, stereo, I don't think, is one of the ones that causes a different payload type, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, so that one we can leave.
How do you do stereo then?
But we could do that with 2 different payload types if we wanted to.
I don't think it makes sense, though. You just negotiate it, so.
That might actually cause some confusion in the offer answer.
Yeah, it would cause confusion. So yeah, so I left out num channels here because I didn't think it was gonna be relevant for channels.
So we have some set of codec-specific parameters which would add lines to codec or add to the set of codec capabilities, and then we have other ones which don't. Is that
right?
Accurate?
So basically, you would say that are we saying that the capabilities should have one item per whatever the browser would use a new payload type for?
Right.
That
whenever
sounds
you get a new
like
line of the
thing to say.
When you ever get a new line of the SDP, you would get a new capability, but otherwise no.
Yeah, and then it should include all the information of clock rate and SDP, FMTP line, and so on.
Yeah, at least right now I'm only proposing 3 new attributes. So there are other issues that talk about other ones, but just for this, just these 3.
Yeah.
But does it make sense to have it be attributes on the capability, or does it make sense to have like a list of codec-specific attributes?
Well,
like, do we want to have synchronization mode for all codec capabilities, even though it's very H.264 specific?
It would be an SDP FMTP line.
Yeah, it's an SDP FMTP line.
Yeah. I'd like to have it completely symmetrical with the codec description that has those things already. And let's keep them in sync.
1 or 2 more slides, we're going to be talking about how the SDP FMTP line is bad, and we want something better.
Yeah, if we can get to that in the next 10 minutes.
We're gonna go down this rabbit hole, but at least for this moment, I'd like to keep it as simple as we can.
All right, so whether they're in the capability outside the FMTP line, or in the FMTP line, or in something that replaces the FMTP line, what's the full set of things that we want? There's the clock rate.
Well, I think if the goal is just to differentiate the lines in the SDP, I'm only proposing the clock rate in the SDP FMTP line right now. I don't think anything else causes the another line in the SDP and another capability. I'm just proposing 2 things right now.
Could you repeat them, Bernard? I lost.
Yeah, so for issue 1040, I am just proposing to add clock rate and SDP FMTP line to RTC RTP codec capability. That's it.
Thanks.
Because I think those are the only two that actually add lines to the SDP, or add a payload type, which is kind of the line in the sand that we're drawing here.
And so that would be on returning the capabilities, and then on setting them. What would you do with those?
Well, so basically, you would return separate capabilities and codec capabilities,
Yep.
and then you could reorder them with the set codec preferences. That's the problem we're trying to fix at the moment.
Okay, but you have to pass back something that is exactly one of the things you received, effectively just reordered.
Yeah, that's the second question, is whether you can change it, but you would basically just, for set codec preferences, you would just reorder the things you got out of get capabilities.
That makes sense to me.
Sounds sane.
Okay, so that's question one. And question two is whether you can change anything. I think Peter's proposal was no. You can't. You just reorder it and that's it.
I think the rabbit hole becomes much deeper if we allow modifications.
Yeah, I think if we're going to allow modifications, they have to be somewhere else. It can't be just munging the SDP FMTP line.
I agree with that, and the one that I found most compelling is the mono stereo thing, and I think that should be handled completely separately in a codec-independent way, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, Cullen pointed out that you can munge the SDP in the offer, so it's not like you're going to die if you don't have it. You can still do it.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we've answered question one seems to be yes, and question two is no, you can't change it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. It would make sense to add number of channels as well, just because it offers some information and it doesn't really hurt, and it matches ORTC.
Yeah, it wouldn't generate a new line, but we could add channels. Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So on to number 1022. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of my initial questions was already resolved, that SDP FMTP line is meant to represent everything after the payload type, but it still seems like it's a little inconvenient for applications because they still need to basically parse SDP. So I was wondering if we could simplify this and make it a dictionary so that you can just read the key value pairs, assuming that all codecs that WebRTC uses or plans to use will have parameters in the form of key value pairs. Which, I think that's the case.
So,
I agree that it would be nice to have a nicer thing you can read. I think a key value pair might be better to do a list of attributes, because there's not always a value.
What do you mean?
For like this events one, right? Oh, that's what you specified.
You could use events equal and a DOM string for that one.
And you also lose the order. I don't know if the order matters. If it's a map, you lose the order.
I've never seen a FMTP one where the ordering matters. If we're doing, but
I mean,
it's impossible.
Is it possible to have
certainly SDP allows future ones to be defined where order matters, even if it.
Yeah. It's totally up to the spec that defines that particular payload.
Is it possible to have the same key twice?
Sure.
Okay.
Now,
Well, if you can have the
I've
same
never
key,
seen a case where that's true, but it's certainly possible because it's effectively totally freeform. It's a string. It doesn't.
Okay.
There's no guarantee that it's separated by semicolons. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that if we're not going to ever modify the SDP FMTP line, you know, it is painful to parse, but if you're never going to change it, I think that makes the dictionary less useful than if you were going to change it.
Yeah, and it's like 2 lines of JavaScript to break it up if it's in the recommended format.
It sounds like it'd probably be a lot simpler to just leave it as a fake string then.
I think I'd probably go that way too. Other thing I mentioned is you'll be getting lots of people have invented proprietary crap that they stuffed in this line. So it's a little bit hard to guess what you might find.
Right, but we agree that it's everything after the payload type. I think
the
name STFMTP line might be a little misleading then, since line kind of implies it's the whole line, but I think we just need to clarify that in the description of the attribute.
STPFMTP that comes after the payload.
Right.
Anyway, the other question.
I really don't want to change it again because we just merged something in stats to make it have the same name.
I noticed that. So, other question, which I think it shouldn't be very controversial. Oh, sorry, actually, it's still on the slide. So, if you call sender.get parameters, the STP line would be from the local. The remote description. I think I got this backwards actually. Yeah, sorry about that. Sender from the remote description, receiver from the local description. Is that correct? Right. I'm sorry that the slide is reversed.
So which slide are you on?
I'm still on the issue 1022 slide.
Yeah. Oh, that part.
Yeah, so I think we need a PR to just clarify that, where the line comes from.
All right.
But I think it would appear the consensus is not to turn it into a dictionary, right? We should get that down. Okay.
So while we're on the topic of the parameters and stuff, would it be good to talk about p time now instead of doing the network error and then coming back to p time?
Well, I think we're almost at a time period, right?
Yeah. So if we can do p time, I don't think we can do that network error in 3 minutes. So let's look at p time and see if we can do that in.
Well, can we do the foo error thing? That should be pretty quick.
Yeah, I'm just proposing consistent terminology when errors are either thrown or a promise is rejected with them. When I say errors, I mean DOM exceptions. So I'm proposing we link to something in WebIDL that defines this further, and then the terminology we use is just throw a, for example, invalid access error, and reject key with a newly created invalid access error, whatever.
Seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fine with me.
Please do. But are you volunteering to write the PR?
Sure.
Right. Okay.
The world's largest PR, probably.
Okay, P time.
All right. Okay, so this one was filed by Varun. Is Varun on the line? Okay. So he's basically said we have a few parameters. So you'd like to have one for packetization interval, but I can't find a way to change it without messing with the STP. I guess Varun isn't here, but I wanted to understand whether he was talking about max P time or P time. And maybe a little bit about the scenario, but I guess Varun's not here. Does someone else want to talk to the potential uses of this?
I think it's valuable to be able to set the p time without STP munching. But I recently learned that Opus, and in particular libopus, only supports certain p times. So it would be
Right.
nice to let the application know which P times. It's not like a range, it's more like a set. And right now,
Right.
libopus has a set of like 2 to 3 possible values.
Right.
Many codecs have a fixed set of ones they support, like multiples of 10 milliseconds or whatever.
Right.
So I think it might make sense to have that set in the codec capabilities, but then the big question is, where do you...
But the other question is, who or what actually cares about this, such that they care to know what that list is or do anything with it?
So
And P time is merely advisory anyway.
There are cases where you would want to send with a larger P time because you care about overhead on poor network.
I mean, audio over a satellite connection you often want to do at 30 milliseconds or even higher, right? And if you're doing really high quality microphones inside a Wi-Fi conference room, it's not even long distance. I know the Opus people wanted to get like 5 milliseconds, or some people even wanted 2 milliseconds or something. It was ridiculous. But I mean, I think if you're doing Wi-Fi mics inside of a conference room or a studio or something like that, there's a good argument for 5 milliseconds.
So that's an argument for being able to set P time, not max P time, but yeah.
Yeah, that was my question. Is the conclusion is we're trying to set P time but not max P time. Do we have agreement on that?
Well, I was thinking of it as the browser says I support this set, and then you can tell the browser, please only use this subset, and you might make the subset only have one thing in it, but...
And that's P time.
Yeah, like pick from these P times.
Pick from these P times. Okay.
That's what I was thinking. I mean,
Well,
if
the thing is, P time is advisory. It's I would like, okay, and I prefer this P time, okay. It doesn't necessarily set it per se, and so the list becomes less interesting in that case. You can say 2 milliseconds. If the codec doesn't support it, it ain't going to do 2 milliseconds. It'll do whatever. At best, it'll do whatever's closest. Okay. So the list seems unimportant to me.
I have to leave, but I think if you provide the list and the codec capabilities, then we can make it so it's not advisory, and the application tells the browser use this P time. Now, maybe that's out of scope for 1.0, and that's like more of an ORTC thing, but I see an application.
Yeah, that's my question, Pete, because if we only have FTP, FNTP line, how do you provide the list of capabilities?
Yeah. And also, like G711, there, every possible entry is in the list of possibles.
Yeah, so we have a multiple needs for syntax here, range or set. So it sounds to me like it's not in 1.0.
Yeah, I mean,
to hit Varun's
putting
thing,
a
it
P time
seems like
I wouldn't mind
seems
putting
like
a P time in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to say the same thing as Randall. I was just like, look, I mean, it seems reasonable to allow the application to indicate something that it wishes the P time might be, right? And not a P time. It's sort of, here's my desired packetization interval as a hint to the system. And then the system chooses something reasonable based on what it feels like doing.
That's what I would, if we're going to do anything, that's what I would want to do.
So are you saying that it only has to be a setting, not a capability, or?
Yeah, it's a setting. It's you know the thing like turning off VAD? It's like that. It's basically saying like, I wish you packetized around about this time, period.
Right, and not codec specific.
Not codec specific, nothing. And then and then the right thing gets negotiated based on that.
Yeah, so the only thing small enough to get into 1.0 is a hint from the, which should be a single value per sender of here's what I want the P time to be.
Yeah.
So volunteers for PR.
Well,
yeah, I can do it.
So where does that hint go? Does that go on like the encoding parameters, or?
Well, that was the question.
That's what Randall has to tell us.
Yeah, if it's for the entire sender, then I don't think it's in the encoding parameters.
Yeah. Okay, time's up, folks. We have gotten through a pretty large proportion of the issues. We got more issues, so we probably have more meetings. But as this is likely my last telechat as working group chair, I'll just say thank you. Thanks for all the fish.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harald, for all the
thank you,
work.
Harald.
Thank you, Harold, for all your work.
Okay.
Thank you, Harold, and
Talk
I'm
to you later.
remembering your previous slide of ITF chair.
Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.